Mom has been confused lately, my son said, and the room went so quiet I could hear the ice settling in my water glass. I had come to Brian's house that Sunday evening expecting pot roast, polite conversation, and maybe a chance to hold on to the family I had spent 72 years loving. Instead, I sat at the end of his dining table while my only son explained me to our relatives as if I were a problem he had already discussed behind closed doors. Vanessa sat beside him in a cream sweater, one hand resting gently over his wrist, her face arranged into the kind of concern people use when they want cruelty to look like kindness. "We just don't want everyone encouraging her stories," Brian added, not looking directly at me. "She's been mixing things up." My fork stayed in my hand. I remember that clearly. The silver handle pressed into my palm, cold and narrow. Across the table, my younger brother Paul looked down at his plate. My niece stopped chewing. Even the twins, Vanessa's nephews, seemed to understand that something shameful had entered the room, though they were too young to name it. I had only asked why Vanessa had taken the blue folder from my kitchen drawer, the one with Harold's insurance papers and the deed to my house. I had asked calmly. I had not raised my voice. I had not forgotten the date, or the drawer, or the fact that Vanessa had stood in my kitchen 3 days earlier pretending to admire the curtains while sliding that folder into her oversized leather purse. But Brian sighed like a tired parent correcting a stubborn child. "Mom, we talked about this. Vanessa didn't take anything. You probably moved it and forgot." That was when I felt the first clean crack inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. A recognition. For months, I had been laughing along when they teased me about misplaced glasses, missed appointments, little senior moments that were never quite mine. I had let Vanessa finish my sentences at church. I had let Brian remind the pharmacist to speak slowly, even though I understood every word. I told myself they were worried. I told myself widowhood made people hover. But that night, under the warm yellow chandelier, surrounded by people who once came to my table for Thanksgiving and Christmas Eve, I finally understood. They were not worried I was confused. They needed everyone else to believe I was. I folded my napkin once, then twice. My hands were steady by the time I stood up. I did not leave immediately. That would have given them the satisfaction of watching me retreat like a frightened old woman. Instead, I thanked Vanessa for dinner, placed my napkin beside the plate, and walked to the hallway to get my coat. Behind me, the dining room remained too quiet. No chair scraped. No one followed. Brian said something low, and Vanessa answered in that soft voice she used when she wanted to sound wounded. I stepped out into the November air with my purse held close against my ribs, and for the first time in months, I did not feel forgetful. I felt awake. The drive home took 18 minutes. I know because I watched the dashboard clock the whole way, its green numbers changing with a calmness I envied. The streets of Columbus were damp from an earlier rain, and porch lights glowed along the sidewalks like small, careful promises. When I pulled into my driveway, my house looked exactly as Harold had left it 3 years before his heart gave out in the garden. White shutters. Brick steps. The maple tree leaning slightly over the garage. A house does not know when people are plotting over it. It simply waits. Inside, I locked the door and stood in the kitchen without turning on the overhead light. The moonlight fell across the oak table where Harold used to read the sports section every morning. His coffee mug still sat on the top shelf, chipped on one side, too ordinary to throw away and too precious to use. I set my purse down and saw the envelope immediately. It had been pushed halfway under the fruit bowl, as if someone had tried to make it look casual. The return address belonged to a memory care clinic across town. My name was printed on the front, Margaret Whitaker, in neat black letters. I opened it slowly. Inside was a confirmation for a cognitive evaluation scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning. I had not called that clinic. I had not asked for an appointment. I had not even spoken to my doctor about my memory, because there was nothing to discuss except the story my family had started telling without me. At the bottom of the page, under Contact Person, was Vanessa's name and Brian's phone number. I sat at the table and read that line again. Then I read it a third time. The refrigerator hummed. The house settled. Somewhere upstairs, The old pipes clicked in the wall. I did not cry. I only folded the paper back into the envelope and placed it beside Harold's mug, where I could see it clearly in the morning. The next morning, I made oatmeal exactly the way Harold used to like it, with brown sugar, cinnamon, and a splash of milk. I ate 2 spoonfuls before setting the bowl aside. The envelope from the clinic sat beside his mug, square and white and patient. I kept looking at it between ordinary tasks, rinsing the spoon, wiping the counter, opening the blinds over the sink. Sunlight moved across the kitchen floor, and with it came memories I had been too generous to question. Vanessa changing my email password because she said the old one was not secure enough. Brian laughing when I asked him to write it down for me, saying, "Mom, you would lose the paper anyway." Vanessa offering to keep a copy of my house key after Harold died, just in case I locked myself out. Brian telling the teller at the bank that I got overwhelmed by forms, though I had balanced household accounts for 46 years without missing a payment. None of it had looked cruel at the time. Cruelty does not always arrive with sharp words. Sometimes it comes carrying a casserole dish and wearing a helpful smile. I remembered the church bake sale in September when Vanessa corrected me in front of Mrs. Donnelly about how much sugar went into my lemon bars. "Margaret gets recipes mixed up now," she had said with a little laugh. Everyone smiled because it sounded harmless. I smiled too, because I did not want to be difficult. Then there was the pharmacy, when Brian spoke over me while I tried to explain that my prescription had already been refilled. "She forgets what she picks up," he told the young pharmacist, touching my shoulder as if I were a child. The pharmacist looked at me differently after that. Softer. Sadder. I had gone home that day and checked the medicine cabinet twice, just to prove to myself I still knew what was real. By noon, the pattern was no longer hiding. It was sitting at my kitchen table with me. Every misplaced item had been announced. Every small hesitation had been turned into a witness. Every correction had been planted where neighbors, clerks, cousins, and church friends could hear it. They were not waiting for me to lose my memory. They were building one for me. I took out a yellow legal pad from Harold's old desk and wrote the first date I could remember. Then another. Then another. By the time the afternoon mail truck passed the house, I had filled 3 pages. By late afternoon, I had stopped writing and started reading what I had written. 3 pages of dates, names, places, and little moments I had once excused as concern. Vanessa was in nearly every line. Vanessa asking if she could help me organize Harold's files because grief made paperwork hard. Vanessa sitting beside me at the dining room table, sliding documents into neat piles while I made tea. Vanessa pausing over the deed to the house and saying, "This place must be a lot for you to manage alone." I remembered her smile when she said it. Soft. Sympathetic. Too smooth. At the time, I thought she was trying to help a lonely widow. Now I saw how carefully she had been measuring the walls. Brian had never cared much about paperwork. He loved his job, his golf weekends, his big television in the basement, but details tired him. Vanessa loved details. She noticed account numbers, renewal dates, signatures, passwords, the exact drawer where I kept insurance policies. She noticed what other people missed because she was not looking at me. She was looking past me, at everything that would remain when I was no longer in the way. I walked into Harold's study and opened the bottom drawer of his walnut desk. The room still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, even though he had quit years before he passed. His reading glasses lay in the brass tray where he always dropped them. I sat in his chair and let my fingers rest on the armrests worn smooth by his hands. He had trusted Brian. So had I. That was the part that made the air feel thin. A stranger can take from you, and it hurts. Your own child can help make it possible, and something inside you goes quiet. I thought of Brian at 8 years old, standing in this very room with a scraped knee, refusing to cry until Harold told him brave people still tell the truth. I wondered when my son had forgotten that. Or worse, when he had decided truth was only useful when it protected him. On the desk, my phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa appeared, cheerful enough to fool anyone who had not spent the day assembling her shadow. "Hi Margaret, just checking in after last night. Brian and I think Tuesday's appointment will give everyone peace of mind. I read it twice. Then I placed the phone beside the yellow legal pad. For the first time, her sweetness did not confuse me. It confirmed everything. Emily arrived just after 6, carrying a paper bag from the grocery store and wearing the gray Ohio State sweatshirt Harold had bought her when she was 12. She had grown tall in the last year, all long legs and serious eyes, but when she stepped into my kitchen, I still saw the little girl who used to climb onto the counter and steal chocolate chips while I pretended not to notice. "I brought tomato soup," she said, setting the bag down carefully. "The kind you like. Not the low-sodium one Dad buys by mistake." That small detail almost undid me. Not because of the soup, but because she remembered. I turned away to get bowls from the cabinet, giving myself a moment to steady my face. Emily did not sit right away. She stood near the table, looking at the envelope from the clinic, the legal pad, and my phone lying screen up beside it. Her expression changed before she spoke. "Grandma," she said softly, "did you agree to let Dad sell your house?" The bowl slipped slightly in my hand, but did not fall. I set it on the counter with more care than necessary. "No," I said. "Why would you ask me that?" Emily swallowed, and in that second, the kitchen felt smaller. "Because Mom said it would probably be on the market by summer. She was on the phone yesterday in Dad's office. She said once the paperwork was handled, they could move fast because the neighborhood is still desirable." The word market seemed to hang in the air like a bad smell. My house. Harold's roses. The maple tree Brian climbed as a boy. The bedroom where I had folded his baby clothes. The porch where Emily learned to ride her scooter. The pantry door with pencil marks showing every inch she had grown. Vanessa had not been measuring the walls after all. She had been pricing them. I pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. Emily came around the table and took the chair beside me, not across from me, and that told me everything about whose side she was on. Her hands twisted in the sleeves of her sweatshirt. "There is more," she whispered. "I heard her say they only needed the family to agree you have been unstable." She used that word. Unstable. Dad told her it felt wrong, and she said feeling wrong would not pay his debts. I looked at my granddaughter's face, pale and frightened and still brave enough to tell me. My heart did not break loudly. It simply made room for the truth. We ate the soup at my kitchen table while the sky outside turned the color of wet newspaper. Emily told me everything in pieces, stopping whenever her voice tightened, then starting again because she knew I needed the whole truth, not the softened version people give old women when they think age has made them fragile. Brian's small construction business had been losing money for almost a year. Vanessa had borrowed against credit cards I did not know they had. There was a second mortgage on their house. Emily had heard arguments through the air vent in her bedroom, not every word, but enough. My name, my house, my accounts. The phrase temporary authority repeated like a prayer they did not deserve to say. I listened without interrupting. The soup went cold. Across the table, my granddaughter kept wiping her palms on her sleeves, ashamed of secrets that were not hers. Finally, I reached over and covered her hand with mine. "You did the right thing," I said. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. After she left, I did not call Brian. I did not answer Vanessa's cheerful text. I did not cancel Tuesday's appointment, not yet. The next morning, I began with people who still knew my voice. First, I called Dr. Elaine Porter, my family physician of 22 years, and asked for a full written record of my last annual exam. She sounded surprised when I mentioned a memory clinic. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I have not referred you anywhere." I wrote that down. Then I called Harold's attorney, Mr. Charles Bennett, who had handled our wills, the house title, and every paper Harold trusted no one else to touch. He listened in silence, the way good lawyers do, and then told me to bring every document I had before signing anything. By noon, I was at my bank on High Street, sitting across from a young manager named Alicia Grant, who spoke to me like an adult, which nearly made me like her before she had done anything else. She checked my accounts, frowned at her screen, and asked whether I had recently authorized Brian Whitaker to be added as a trusted contact for account management. I folded my hands in my lap. "No," I said. The word came out small, but it did not shake. Alicia printed the inquiry record for me. Brian had come in with Vanessa 2 weeks earlier. They had asked what steps were needed if an elderly parent could no longer manage finances. I placed that paper in my purse beside the clinic envelope. The pattern had become a trail. On Tuesday morning, I dressed for the memory clinic as if I were going to church. Navy slacks, white blouse, pearl earrings, Harold's watch on my left wrist. I wanted Vanessa to see exactly what she had failed to erase. Brian picked me up at 8:45, driving the black SUV Vanessa insisted was safer than my sedan. He kissed my cheek when I got in, but his eyes moved quickly to my purse, as if papers might be visible through leather. "You feeling all right, Mom?" he asked. "Perfectly," I said. Vanessa sat in the front passenger seat, turning around with a bright smile that did not reach her eyes. "This is just routine, Margaret. No one is accusing you of anything. People only say that when accusations have already been made." At the clinic, the waiting room smelled like coffee, disinfectant, and artificial lavender. A television mounted in the corner played a morning show no one watched. Vanessa checked me in before I could reach the desk, spelling my name with the confidence of someone who had practiced owning it. When the receptionist asked for my insurance card, Vanessa opened her purse. I opened mine first and placed the card on the counter. A small thing. Her smile tightened. The evaluation itself was simple. Dates. Words to remember. A clock to draw. Questions about medications, bills, daily routines. I answered each one calmly while Brian stared at his shoes and Vanessa watched the doctor's pen as if it might betray her. Dr. Mills was a kind woman with silver-framed glasses. When she asked why I had come in, I looked directly at her and said, "Because my family scheduled this appointment without my consent." The room changed. Not loudly. Just enough. Brian shifted in his chair. Vanessa gave a little laugh. "Margaret gets anxious about paperwork," she said. Dr. Mills did not laugh with her. She made a note. After the appointment, Vanessa suggested lunch at a cafe nearby, but I asked to be taken home. In the driveway, Brian handed me a folded document from the console. "Just look it over," he said. "It lets us help temporarily in case things get complicated." The words "temporary assistance agreement" were printed across the top. I held the paper without opening it. "Did you read this before bringing it to me?" I asked. His mouth tightened. Vanessa looked out the window. That was answer enough. I tucked the document into my purse beside the bank record, the clinic envelope, and 3 pages of yellow legal pad. They thought they were collecting proof against me. Quietly, so was I. For 2 days after the clinic appointment, the house became quiet in a different way. Not empty. Watchful. I kept my purse locked in Harold's desk drawer and made copies of everything at the public library on Lane Avenue, where the copier still made that warm paper smell I remembered from school offices. I copied the clinic envelope, the bank inquiry record, the temporary assistance agreement, and every page of my yellow legal pad. Then I mailed one set to Mr. Bennett and hid another inside an old sewing basket Vanessa would never touch because it looked too plain to be useful. Emily came over Thursday after class with her laptop tucked under one arm and worry sitting heavily on her face. She had not slept much. I could tell by the shadows under her eyes and the way she kept rubbing the same spot on her sleeve. "Grandma," she said, "Mom is planning something at church on Sunday." I poured her iced tea and waited. People tell the truth more clearly when you do not rush them. She opened her laptop on the kitchen table and showed me a message Vanessa had sent to a group chat with several relatives. The words were polished and gentle, which made them worse. She said the family needed to gather around me with compassion. She said recent events had shown that I might no longer be safe making decisions alone. She said Brian was heartbroken, but willing to step up. I looked at the screen until the letters stopped swimming. Then Emily clicked another file. "I recorded this by accident at first," she whispered. Then I kept recording because I knew no one would believe me. The audio was faint, but Vanessa's voice was clear enough. She was coaching Brian in the kitchen, telling him not to sound angry, only concerned. "Use the word confused, not incapable," she said. "It sounds kinder. People accept kinder." Brian mumbled something I could not make out. Vanessa answered, "Your mother has equity sitting there while we drown." Do you want to lose our house because you're afraid to look firm? I did not move. The refrigerator hummed beside us. A car passed outside, splashing through a puddle left by the rain. Emily watched my face as if she expected me to crumble. I reached across the table and closed the laptop halfway, gently, not because I wanted to stop hearing it, but because I had heard enough. Save copies, I said. Send them to Mr. Bennett. Emily nodded. Her hands were shaking. Mine were not. Sunday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of Ohio morning that makes every bare branch look drawn in pencil against the sky. I woke before 6, made coffee, and ironed my gray dress at the end of the kitchen table. Harold used to say gray made me look dignified, not old. I chose it for that reason. Then I placed the copied papers in a flat leather folder and slipped it into my purse beside my lipstick and church bulletin from the week before. Emily offered to drive me, but I told her no. I needed to arrive in my own car on my own time, with both hands steady on the wheel. The meeting was set for 1:30 in the fellowship room behind Grace Methodist, after the late service and before the youth group came in for pizza. Vanessa had chosen the location carefully. No one raises their voice easily under a framed picture of Jesus and a corkboard full of casserole sign-up sheets. When I walked in, almost everyone was already there. Brian stood near the coffee urn in a blue sweater I had given him 2 Christmases ago. Vanessa was beside him, passing out paper cups as if hospitality could cover intention. My brother Paul sat with his wife near the window. 2 cousins from Dayton whispered over folded hands. Reverend Collins stood awkwardly by the piano, looking as if he had been invited into something he did not fully understand. A woman I recognized as Vanessa's lawyer sat at the end of the long table with a notepad open. Emily was in the back corner, laptop bag at her feet, face pale but composed. Vanessa crossed the room first. "Margaret, thank you for coming," she said, touching my elbow. I moved my arm just enough that her hand fell away naturally. "It is my family," I said. "I was invited." A few people looked down. Brian cleared his throat and asked everyone to sit. He began gently, just as he had been coached. He said these past months had been hard. He said grief can change people. He said there had been concerns about my judgment, my memory, my ability to manage a house alone. Vanessa lowered her eyes at the right moments. The lawyer wrote nothing, only watched. Then Brian looked at me with a sadness that was almost convincing and said, "Mom, we are only trying to protect you." I folded my hands on the table. The room waited for confusion. I gave them silence instead. I reached into my purse and took out the leather folder. The sound of the zipper seemed louder than it should have in that small church room. Vanessa watched my hands with the expression of someone seeing a door close from the wrong side. I placed the first paper on the table and turned it toward the lawyer at the end. "That is the written summary from Dr. Mills," I said. "The evaluation your clients scheduled without my consent found no evidence that I am unable to manage my affairs." The lawyer leaned forward. Vanessa whispered her name, but the woman lifted one hand slightly, asking her to stop. I placed down the second paper. "That is a letter from Dr. Porter, my physician of 22 years, confirming she never referred me for cognitive testing and never discussed such concerns with Brian or Vanessa." Brian closed his eyes. I placed down the third paper. "That is the bank record showing an inquiry made 2 weeks ago about adding my son as a trusted contact for financial management. I did not authorize it." No one moved. The room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, ordinary smells for a very unordinary moment. Then I placed the temporary assistance agreement in the center of the table, still folded exactly as Brian had handed it to me in the driveway. "And this is the document my son asked me to look over after the appointment." He had not read it. I asked him. He could not answer. Brian finally looked at me. There were tears in his eyes, but I had learned that regret can arrive after the damage and still expect a chair at the table. I did not give it one. "Mr. Bennett has already received copies of everything," I continued. "My accounts have new security protections. My house is being placed into a private trust. Emily is now my emergency contact. No one here, including my son, has permission to request records, schedule appointments, speak for me, or enter my home without my invitation." Vanessa stood fully then. Margaret, you are making this sound much worse than it was. I looked at her for a long moment. She had spent months making me sound smaller than I was. It felt only fair to answer with the exact size of the truth. No, Vanessa, I said. I am making it sound exactly as it was. Reverend Collins stepped away from the piano and quietly asked the lawyer whether the meeting should continue. The lawyer closed her notepad. That was her answer. The meeting ended without anyone saying it was over. People simply began gathering coats, closing purses, avoiding eyes. That is how public shame leaves a room, not in one loud exit, but in small movements that admit more than words can. Paul came to me first. He touched my shoulder, then let his hand fall when he realized he had no right to comfort me yet. Margaret, he said, I should have asked you. I nodded once. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Just acknowledgement. Brian waited near the coffee urn until everyone else had stepped into the hallway. Vanessa had already gone ahead, her heels clicking sharply on the tile, each step less graceful than the one before. When Brian approached me, he looked older than he had that morning. Mom, he said, I am sorry. I let things get out of hand. I looked at the boy I had raised and the man who had chosen convenience over courage. Both were standing in front of me, and only one of them could be answered. You did not lose my house today, I said quietly. You lost the right to call it home. He flinched, but I did not soften it. Some truths are not cruel just because they hurt. Emily drove home behind me, though I did not ask her to. I saw her little blue car in my rearview mirror all the way through Columbus, past wet sidewalks, gas stations, and bare trees shining under the winter sun. When I pulled into my driveway, my house looked different. Not newer. Not safer. Just mine again. That evening, Emily and I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup in Harold's old kitchen. She sat where he used to sit, folding her legs under the chair like she had when she was small. Neither of us spoke much. We did not need to fill the silence to prove we were not alone. Later, after she left, I walked through each room and turned on the lamps one by one. The hallway, the study, the bedroom, the living room with Harold's photograph on the mantel. For months, they had tried to make me doubt my own mind. But memory is not only where you put your keys or whether you forget a name. Memory is knowing who held your hand when grief was fresh, who looked away when you needed help, and who stood up when everyone else sat still. They called me confused because they were afraid of what I still remembered.